The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in August 1883, and Sarah Victoria read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to set it down on the kitchen table. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 6 months, killed in a mining accident outside Ash Fork, Arizona, and now his family back in Philadelphia wanted her to come home, to remarry within the year, to stop this foolishness of trying to run a cattle ranch alone in the territories. She crumpled the telegram in her fist and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty yard where chickens pecked at the hard-packed earth. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning everything brown and gold. 23 years old, and already people were telling her what to do with the rest of her life. The ranch was small, just 40 head of cattle and a few horses, but it was hers. Thomas had bought it 2 years ago with dreams of building something bigger, something that would last. Now those dreams sat heavy on her shoulders, along with the weight of expectation from people who had never set foot in Arizona territory. Sarah smoothed her dark hair back from her face and made a decision. She would not go back to Philadelphia. She would not remarry before the year was done just because convention demanded it. She would figure out how to keep this ranch running, even if she had to do it herself. The problem was, she did not know the first thing about running a cattle operation. Thomas had handled all of that, and she had focused on the house, the garden, the chickens. Now she found herself staring at account books that might as well have been written in Greek, trying to understand profit margins and feed costs and water rights. 3 days after the telegram arrived, she rode into town to talk to the bank. Ash Fork was a small settlement, barely more than a few buildings clustered along the railroad tracks, but it had everything a rancher needed. General store, saloon, blacksmith, and the First Territorial Bank, where Mr. Henderson sat behind his desk, like a judge ready to pass sentence. "Mrs. Victoria," he said, standing when she entered, "what can I do for you today?" Sarah sat in the chair across from him without waiting to be asked. She had worn her best dress, dark blue with modest trim, and pinned her hair up properly. She wanted to look like a woman who had her affairs in order, even if the reality was far different. "I need to discuss the ranch loan," she said. Mr. Henderson's expression shifted, became cautious. "I see. Have you given thought to my previous suggestion?" His previous suggestion had been to sell the ranch and use the proceeds to return to her family back east. Sarah kept her voice steady. "I am not selling. I want to keep the ranch running. I need advice on how to do that. Mrs. Victoria, with all due respect, cattle ranching is not work for a woman alone. The physical demands, the business aspects, the simple danger of it all. Surely you can see reason." "I see perfectly well," Sarah said. "I see that I have a ranch and I intend to run it. What I need to know is whether the bank will work with me or against me." Mr. Henderson sighed. He was a thin man with graying hair and tired eyes. "The loan payment is due in 3 months. Can you meet it?" Sarah had looked at the account books enough to know the answer. "If I can get the cattle to market in Flagstaff in the fall, yes. If not, no." "And do you know how to organize a cattle drive? How to hire drovers? How to negotiate with buyers?" Each question landed like a stone in her stomach. "I can learn. In 3 months?" Mr. Henderson shook his head. "Mrs. Victoria, I am not trying to be unkind, but the reality is that without help, you will lose that ranch. The bank will have no choice but to foreclose." Sarah stood. Her hands were shaking again, but she kept them clasped in front of her. "Then I will find help. Good day, Mr. Henderson." She walked out into the bright afternoon sun, blinking against the glare. The street was quiet, just a few horses tied at the hitching posts and a wagon rattling past. She had no idea where to find the kind of help she needed. The few neighboring ranchers had been polite after Thomas died, but none had offered any real assistance. A widow was a problem to be solved, not a neighbor to be helped. Sarah was halfway to her horse when she heard the voice behind her. "Pardon me, madam." She turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but clean, and he had the look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. She guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27. "Yes," she said. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation in the bank," he said. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I know that is not proper, and I apologize. But if you are looking for help with a cattle operation, I might be able to offer my services." Sarah studied him more carefully. He had an honest face, she thought, with gray eyes that met hers directly. But she had learned the hard way that honest faces could hide all manner of intentions. "I do not know you," she said. "No, madam. My name is Xavier Keller. I have been working on the Diamond Bar Ranch, north of here for the past 2 years, but the owner is selling out and heading back to Texas. I am looking for new work." "And you think I can pay you?" Xavier Keller smiled slightly. "I heard you tell Mr. Henderson that you could make the loan payment if you got your cattle to market. That tells me you have some resources, just not the knowledge to use them. I am not looking to get rich, madam. I am looking for steady work and a fair wage." Sarah wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this offered lifeline with both hands, but something held her back. Why would you want to work for a widow woman trying to run a ranch she does not understand? You could get work anywhere. "Maybe," he said, "but most places they will work a man hard and pay him little, and then cut him loose when times get tight. You, on the other hand, you need someone who will stay and teach you what you need to know. That sounds like more secure work to me, if you are willing to learn." It was the most straightforward explanation Sarah had heard in months. She made her decision. "My ranch is 5 miles west of town, the Victoria Place. Come out tomorrow morning, and we will discuss terms." "Yes, madam. I will be there at sunrise." Sarah rode home with her mind spinning. She had just hired a man she did not know, based on nothing more than a conversation on the street. Thomas's family would be horrified. Mr. Henderson would shake his head sadly. But something in Xavier Keller's voice had been genuine, and right now, genuine help was exactly what she needed. The next morning, she woke before dawn and dressed carefully. She made coffee and biscuits, then went out to the barn to check on the horses. The sun was just breaking over the eastern hills when she saw a rider approaching on the road. Xavier Keller arrived exactly at sunrise, as promised. He was riding a buckskin horse and leading a pack mule loaded with what Sarah assumed were his possessions. Everything he owned, probably, tied up in a few bundles. "Mrs. Victoria," he said, dismounting. "Mr. Keller, come inside. We should discuss this properly." They sat at the kitchen table with coffee between them. In the morning light, Sarah could see that Xavier was younger than she had first thought, probably not more than 25. His hands were work-roughened, and he had a scar along his right forearm that looked like it had come from a rope burn. "Tell me about your experience," Sarah said. Xavier wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I grew up in Wyoming on a ranch, started working cattle when I was 10 years old. Came down to Arizona 3 years ago, looking for better weather and different scenery. I have done everything from breaking horses to managing herds to organizing drives. I am not the best cowboy in the territory, but I am reliable and I know what I am doing." "Why did you leave Wyoming?" He was quiet for a moment. "My father died. My older brother inherited the ranch. We did not see eye to eye on how things should be run. It seemed better to move on." Sarah understood that. Family could be the most complicated thing in the world. "I need someone who can teach me how to run this ranch properly. Not just do the work, but show me how it is done so I can make my own decisions. Can you do that?" "Yes, madam, I believe I can." "The pay will not be much. $25 a month to start, plus room and board. There is a small cabin out back that the previous hand used. It is not fancy, but it is solid." "That sounds fair. And Mr. Keller, I need to be clear about something." Sarah met his eyes directly. "I am a widow, and you are an unmarried man, I assume. People will talk. I need this to be a strictly professional arrangement. I am not looking for anything beyond help with this ranch. Xavier nodded seriously. I understand completely, madam. You have my word that I will conduct myself appropriately at all times. And for what it is worth, I overheard what you said to Mr. Henderson about not selling. I respect that. A lot of folks would have given up already. Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Then I suppose we have an agreement. Welcome to the Victoria Ranch, Mr. Keller. Please call me Xavier. Mr. Keller was my father. Then you should call me Sarah, at least when we are working. Mrs. Victoria makes me feel like someone's grandmother. Xavier smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Sarah it is then. Should we take a look at the operation? They spent the rest of the morning touring the ranch. Sarah showed him the 40 head of cattle scattered across the scrubby pasture land, the horses in the corral, the barn that needed repairs, the irrigation ditch that Thomas had started but never finished. Xavier walked slowly, asking questions, making occasional notes in a small leather book he pulled from his pocket. The cattle look healthy, he said finally. That is good. The pasture is decent for this time of year, but you will need to think about supplementing their feed come winter. The horses are solid working stock. The infrastructure needs work, but nothing that cannot be handled. What about getting them to market? Sarah asked. That is the biggest challenge. Flagstaff is about 60 miles north. With 40 head, we would need at least 2 people for the drive, preferably 3. It will take us about a week, maybe more depending on conditions. We will need to time it right after the worst of the summer heat, but before the fall, rains make the trails muddy. So September? Early October would be better. That gives us about 2 months to get everything ready and to put some more weight on the cattle. The buyers pay by the pound, so every bit helps. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb all the information. What do we need to do first? First, I will get settled in the cabin and familiarize with the layout. Then we will start working on the immediate needs. The barn roof, the water situation, getting a count of supplies. After that, we can start planning the drive in detail. It sounded overwhelming, but also strangely possible when Xavier laid it out like that. Sarah had spent the past 6 months feeling like she was drowning, and now suddenly someone was showing her how to swim. Over the next few weeks, Sarah learned more about ranching than she had in the entire 2 years she had lived on the property. Xavier was a patient teacher, showing her how to check cattle for illness, how to mend tack, how to read the land for water and grazing. He worked from sunrise to sunset, and Sarah found herself working right alongside him, her hands blistering and then callousing, her back aching in new ways. She also learned about Xavier himself, in small pieces revealed during their conversations. He had grown up with 2 brothers and a sister. His mother had died when he was young. He loved horses more than cattle, but cattle paid better. He could play the harmonica, but was terrible at poker. He had once seen a grizzly bear in Wyoming and had been terrified. He read books when he could get them, mostly adventure stories and histories. In turn, Sarah found herself talking about things she had not spoken of in months. About growing up in Philadelphia as the daughter of a shopkeeper. About meeting Thomas at a church social and being swept off her feet by his dreams of the West. About the shock of arriving in Arizona and finding it so different from everything she had imagined. About the loneliness after Thomas died, when the silence in the house became so loud she could barely stand it. It must have been hard, Xavier said one evening. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the distant hills. It had become something of a habit, these evening conversations. Losing him so suddenly. It was, Sarah said, but in some ways I think I had already started losing him before that. He was so consumed with the ranch, with making it work. We barely talked anymore. I loved him, but I am not sure he saw me as a partner, more like someone who was along for the ride. Xavier was quiet for a moment. My brother was like that with his wife, had all these plans and ideas, never stopped to ask what she wanted. Last I heard, she left him and went back to her family in Kansas. I thought about leaving, Sarah admitted. After Thomas died, it would have been easier, but then I realized I did not want to go back. I like it here. I like the space, the sky, the feeling that you can see forever. I just wish I knew what I was doing. You are learning fast, Xavier said, faster than most. You are going to make this work. It was a simple statement, but it filled Sarah with a warmth she had not felt in a long time. Someone believed in her. Someone thought she could do this. The telegram from Philadelphia came again in mid-September. This one was more insistent. Her father-in-law demanded that she return home immediately. It was unseemly for her to be living alone out in the territories. There were men in Philadelphia who would be suitable matches. She had a duty to the family. Sarah read it once and then threw it in the stove. She watched the paper curl and blacken and felt no regret. Xavier found her standing by the stove, staring at the flames. "Bad news?" he asked. "My late husband's family. They want me to come back to Philadelphia and remarry. They say I am bringing shame on them by staying here. What do you want to do?" It was such a simple question, but no one else had asked it. They had all told her what she should do, what was proper, what made sense. No one had asked what she actually wanted. "I want to stay," Sarah said. "I want to run this ranch and prove that I can do it. I want to live my own life, not the one someone else has planned for me." Xavier nodded. "Then that is what you should do. Anyone who tries to tell you different, they can answer to me." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. Xavier was standing in her kitchen with dust on his clothes and a smudge of dirt on his jaw, and he was the most attractive man she had ever seen, not because he was handsome, though he was in a rough-hewn way, but because he saw her, really saw her, not as a widow or a duty or a problem, but as a person with her own wants and dreams. She pushed the feeling away. It was too soon. She had only been widowed 6 months. What would people say? But even as she thought it, she knew the answer. People would say exactly what they were already saying, that she was improper, that she was shameful, that she should go back east and be a good little widow and marry whoever they picked out for her. Sarah Victoria had spent 23 years doing what other people expected. Maybe it was time to start doing what she wanted. The preparations for the cattle drive consumed the next few weeks. Xavier hired 2 men from town, experienced drovers who were willing to work for a fair wage and a share of the profits. Sarah met with Mr. Henderson at the bank and showed him the detailed plans Xavier had drawn up. The banker had been skeptical, but he could not argue with the numbers. If they got the cattle to market at a decent price, the loan payment would be met with money to spare. Sarah insisted on going along on the drive. Xavier had tried to talk her out of it at first, citing the difficulties and dangers, but she had been firm. "This is my ranch," she said. "I need to learn every part of running it, including this. Besides, you will need someone to handle the cooking and camp chores." Xavier had given her a long look and then nodded. "All right, but it will not be easy. You will be sleeping on the ground and eating trail food and spending 12 hours a day in the saddle. If at any point it becomes too much, you tell me." "I will," Sarah promised, but she had no intention of backing out. They left on the 1st of October, driving the cattle north toward Flagstaff. Sarah had never been on a cattle drive before, and the reality was even harder than she had imagined. The days were long and dusty, the nights cold and uncomfortable. Her body ached constantly, but there was also something exhilarating about it, something free. Out on the trail, she was not a widow or a lady or anything other than another person working to get the job done. Xavier rode beside her much of the time, pointing out landmarks and teaching her the rhythms of moving cattle. The 2 hired men, Jack and Pete, were weathered cowboys who treated her with polite respect and seemed to accept her presence without question. At night, they made camp, and Sarah cooked beans and bacon and coffee over an open fire, then fell asleep, listening to the men talk in low voices and the cattle settling down in the darkness. On the third night, a storm rolled in from the west. Sarah woke to lightning splitting the sky and thunder that sounded like the earth breaking open. The cattle were restless, moving and lowing nervously. Xavier was already up, pulling on his boots. "Stay here," he said to Sarah. "We need to keep the herd calm or they will stampede." But Sarah was already getting up, reaching for her own boots. "I can help." "Sarah, this is dangerous. So is everything else we have been doing. Tell me what to do." Xavier looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. "Stay on the east side of the herd. Sing to them if you can. Keep your voice calm. If they start to run, get out of the way and let them go. Do not try to be a hero." Sarah nodded and grabbed her horse. Her hands were shaking as she saddled up, but she forced herself to move carefully and deliberately. The storm was building, the wind picking up and carrying the smell of rain. The cattle were on their feet now, milling nervously. She rode out to the east side of the herd and started singing. It was a hymn her mother had taught her, something about grace and mercy. Her voice sounded thin and small against the wind, but she kept going. Beside her, she could hear Xavier and the other men doing the same, their voices weaving together in the darkness. The lightning flashed again, so close she could feel the electricity in the air. One of the steers bellowed and lunged, and for a moment Sarah thought the whole herd would go. But Xavier was there, moving his horse to block the steer, turning it back. The other men were doing the same, working in concert like they had done this 100 times before. The rain came then, a sudden drenching downpour that soaked Sarah to the skin in seconds. She kept singing, kept moving with the herd. Her whole world narrowed down to the mass of cattle in front of her, and the sound of Xavier's voice somewhere in the darkness. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 30 minutes before the storm passed and the cattle settled. Sarah sat on her horse, dripping and exhausted, and felt a fierce pride. She had done it. She had helped keep the herd together. Xavier rode up beside her, his hat dripping water. "You all right?" "Yes," Sarah said. And then because it was true, that was terrifying. Xavier laughed, a surprised sound. "Yes, it was, but you did good. Real good." They made it to Flagstaff 6 days after leaving the ranch. Sarah had never been to a real city before, and even though Flagstaff was small by Eastern standards, it felt huge and overwhelming after days on the trail. The streets were busy with people and wagons, and the buildings seemed to crowd in on all sides. Xavier led them to the stockyards on the edge of town, where buyers congregated to inspect incoming cattle. Sarah watched as he negotiated with a buyer, his voice calm and steady, refusing to be pushed into a lower price. In the end, he got them $8 more per head than Sarah had hoped for. "How did you do that?" she asked as they walked away from the stockyards. "You just have to know what your cattle are worth and not accept less," Xavier said. "Those buyers, they will try to lowball you every time, but your cattle are healthy and well-fed, and they know it. They need your stock more than you need their money, at least right now." They settled the accounts at the bank in Flagstaff. Then Xavier took the hired men to get their pay. Sarah stood on the street with more money in her pocket than she had seen in months, feeling dizzy with relief. They had done it. The ranch was saved. That night, they stayed in a hotel in Flagstaff. Sarah had a room to herself with an actual bed and clean sheets, and she soaked in a hot bath for an hour, washing away the trail dust and grime. When she came down for dinner, she found Xavier waiting in the lobby. He had cleaned up too, shaving and changing into fresh clothes, and Sarah felt her heart skip when she saw him. They ate in the hotel dining room, a real meal with steak and potatoes and fresh bread. It felt almost sinfully luxurious after days of trail food. Xavier was more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him, telling stories about previous cattle drives and making her laugh until her sides hurt. "There was this one time," he said, "when I was working a drive in Wyoming, and we had this steer we called Red because of the color of his hide. Mean as a rattlesnake, that animal. One day, he decided he had had enough of the drive and just took off running. Took 3 of us 2 hours to round him up, and when we finally did, he looked at us like we were the ones causing problems." Sarah laughed. "What happened to him?" Sold him to the first buyer we found. Figured he was someone else's problem after that. They lingered over coffee, neither of them quite ready to end the evening. The dining room was emptying out, and Sarah knew she should go up to her room, but she found herself reluctant to leave. Sarah, Xavier said finally, his voice serious. Can I ask you something? Of course. That telegram you got from your husband's family. Did you mean what you said? That you want to stay on the ranch? Yes, Sarah said. I meant every word. Xavier nodded slowly. Good, because I want you to know I will help you for as long as you need me. This is not just a job for me anymore. I believe in what you are doing. I believe in you. Sarah felt heat rise in her face. Thank you. That means more than you know. There is something else, Xavier said. He was looking down at his coffee cup, not meeting her eyes. I know you said you wanted this to be a professional arrangement, and I have tried to respect that, but I need to be honest with you. These past couple months, working beside you, getting to know you, I have developed feelings that go beyond professional. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. Xavier, I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know it has only been 6 months since your husband passed. I know people would talk. I just needed you to know because I do not want to be dishonest with you. If you want me to leave after we get back to the ranch, I will understand. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand over his. His skin was warm and calloused and familiar. I do not want you to leave. And I need to be honest with you too. I have feelings for you as well. I have been trying not to because it seems too soon and too complicated, but I cannot help it. Xavier looked up, his gray eyes searching her face. What do we do? I do not know, Sarah said, but I know I do not want to lose you. Can we take this slowly? Figure it out as we go? I can do slowly, Xavier said. He turned his hand over so their palms were touching. I can take all the time you need. They rode back to the ranch 3 days later, taking their time and enjoying the journey. The hired men had gone their separate ways, and it was just Sarah and Xavier on the trail. They talked for hours as they rode, about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Xavier loved thunderstorms and hated the smell of sage. Xavier learned that Sarah could recite entire passages of poetry from memory and that she had always wanted to learn to play the piano. When they finally reached the ranch, it felt like coming home in a way it never had before. Sarah looked at the small house and the barn and the dusty yard and felt a swell of affection. This was hers. She had built this, or at least saved it, and she was proud. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Sarah went into town and paid off the bank loan, enjoying the look of surprise on Mr. Henderson's face. She bought supplies for the winter and put the remaining money into an account for emergencies. Xavier worked on the repairs around the ranch, fixing the barn roof and finishing the irrigation ditch that Thomas had started. Word had spread about Sarah's successful cattle drive, and the neighboring ranchers started treating her differently. They stopped by to ask advice or to offer help with projects. She was no longer just a widow to be pitied, but a fellow rancher who had proven herself. The gossip about her and Xavier started almost immediately, of course. People noticed that they worked together, that they talked and laughed together, that Xavier had stayed on long past the cattle drive. Sarah heard the whispers when she went into town, saw the disapproving looks from some of the older women. She tried not to let it bother her, but one day in late October she came back from town looking upset. Xavier found her in the barn, mucking out stalls with more force than was strictly necessary. What happened? He asked. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said. She stabbed her pitchfork into the hay. She made a point of telling me that it was shameful, a widow living alone with an unmarried man. She said people were talking, that I was ruining my reputation. Xavier leaned against the stall door. What did you say? I told her it was my reputation to ruin, but Xavier, What if she is right? What if I am making a terrible mistake? Do you think you are? Sarah stopped working and looked at him. No, I am happier than I have been in years. But everyone seems to think I should be miserable and proper instead. Then they can think what they want, Xavier said. Sarah, you told your in-laws that you would not remarry just because they said you should. Why are you letting Mrs. Patterson have more say over your life than they did? It was a good question. Sarah set down the pitchfork. I suppose I am not, but it would be easier if people would just leave us alone. People never leave anyone alone, Xavier said. But that does not mean we have to listen to them. November brought cooler weather and the first hint of winter. Sarah and Xavier worked together to prepare the ranch for the cold months ahead, stockpiling hay and reinforcing the shelters. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and read or talked or simply enjoyed each other's company. It was a quiet life, but a good one. One evening in mid-November, Xavier asked, Have you heard from your in-laws again? No, Sarah said. I think they have finally given up on me. Good. You deserve to live your own life. Sarah looked at him across the firelight. They had been carefully proper for months now, but the tension between them had been building. She could feel it every time their hands brushed, every time their eyes met. She was tired of fighting it. Xavier, she said, you told me in Flagstaff that you could take all the time I needed. Do you still mean that? Of course. What if I said I do not need any more time? What if I said that I know what I want and it is you? Xavier went very still. Sarah, are you sure? It has only been 8 months since Thomas died. I do not want you to do anything you will regret. I am sure, Sarah said. She stood and crossed to where he sat, kneeling down so they were eye level. I love Thomas, but that life is over. I have spent the past 8 months building a new life, and you are part of it. You have been part of it from the beginning. I do not want to wait anymore. Xavier reached out and cupped her face in his hands. I have wanted to do this since the first day I met you, he said softly, and then he kissed her. It was nothing like the kisses Sarah remembered with Thomas, which had been dutiful and brief. This was fire and sweetness and hunger all mixed together. She melted into it, into Xavier, feeling like she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I think I have loved you since the day I saw you standing outside that bank, refusing to give up. I love you too, Sarah said. The words felt right, true in a way nothing else had in a long time. They did not rush into anything, despite the feelings between them. Xavier moved his belongings into the main house, but he took the spare bedroom and they continued to be careful about propriety. Sarah knew that marriage was the logical next step, but she found herself hesitant. She had been married before, had promised forever to someone, and then lost him. The idea of making those promises again was frightening. Xavier seemed to understand without her having to explain. He did not push, did not demand. He simply loved her and let her take the time she needed to figure out what she wanted. December arrived, and with it a cold snap that froze the water troughs and turned the morning air sharp and biting. Xavier taught Sarah how to break ice and how to keep the cattle fed when the grazing was poor. They worked side by side, their breath fogging in the cold air, and Sarah marveled at how natural it felt. On Christmas Eve, they decorated the house with pine branches and made a special dinner. It was nothing fancy, just roast chicken and potatoes and a pie Sarah had made from preserved apples, but it felt festive and warm. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Xavier pulled out his harmonica. I did not know you brought that with you, Sarah said. I keep it in my saddlebag, Xavier said, for special occasions. He played a few carols, the notes sweet and slightly melancholy in the quiet house. Sarah found herself thinking about the Christmas before, when Thomas had been alive and everything had been so different. She had been lonely then, she realized. Lonely in a way she was not anymore. Xavier, she said when the music stopped. Will you marry me? He lowered the harmonica, staring at her. What? I am asking you to marry me. I know that is not how it is supposed to be done, but I am tired of doing things the way they are supposed to be done. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Xavier set the harmonica aside and pulled her into his arms. Yes, he said against her hair. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. They were married in January 1884 in a small ceremony at the church in Ash Fork. The neighboring ranchers came, and a few people from town, and even Mr. Henderson from the bank. Sarah wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, pale green with white trim. Xavier wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. The ceremony was short and straightforward. When the minister asked if anyone objected, there was a long moment of silence, and Sarah found herself holding her breath. But no one spoke up. When Xavier kissed her as his wife, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by all the guests. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Sarah felt like she was floating. This was her life now, her ranch, her husband, her community. She had built this out of grief and stubbornness and determination, and it was good. Late in the afternoon, when the party was winding down, Sarah and Xavier stood together at the edge of the yard, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Xavier had his arm around her waist, holding her close. I never thought I would have this, he said quietly. A home, a wife, a place to belong. I spent years drifting from job to job, never staying anywhere long. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. Sarah leaned into him. Neither can I. Thank you for giving me the time I needed, for not pushing. I would have waited forever, Xavier said. You are worth waiting for. The winter passed peacefully. Sarah and Xavier settled into married life, learning each other's rhythms and habits. They talked about expanding the ranch in the spring, maybe buying another 20 head of cattle and some more horses. Sarah wanted to start a proper garden, growing vegetables and maybe some flowers. Xavier wanted to build a new barn, bigger and sturdier than the old one. In March, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to see his reaction. He went very still for a moment, and then a huge smile spread across his face. Really? He said. You are sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, Sarah said. Are you happy? Happy? Sarah, I am thrilled. We are going to have a baby. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Xavier was endlessly patient, bringing her water and crackers and holding her hair back when she was ill. As her belly grew, the work became harder, but she refused to stop entirely. She did lighter tasks, feeding the chickens and tending the garden and managing the accounts, while Xavier handled the heavier ranch work. In June, Sarah made the trip into Flagstaff to see a doctor and stock up on supplies before the baby came. Xavier came with her, protective and slightly anxious. The doctor confirmed that she was healthy, and the baby seemed to be developing well. They were due in late September or early October, he said. Right around the time we did our first cattle drive, Xavier said on the ride home. Seems fitting, Sarah said. She was uncomfortable in the saddle, her back aching, but also content. A year ago, she had been alone and scared and trying to figure out how to survive. Now she was married and pregnant and heading home to a ranch that was thriving. Life had a funny way of working out. August brought another telegram from Philadelphia. This one was from Thomas's brother, Edward. He had heard through the family network that Sarah had remarried and was expecting a child. He wanted to congratulate her and to apologize for the family's earlier insistence that she return. He hoped she was happy and that she would consider staying in touch. Sarah read the telegram twice and then showed it to Xavier. I did not expect that, she said. People can surprise you, Xavier said. Are you going to write back? I think I will. Not to reconnect with the whole family, but Edward was always kind to me. It would be nice to let him know how I am doing. She wrote a letter that evening, telling Edward about the ranch and Xavier and the baby on the way. She did not mention how hard it had been or how much Thomas's family had hurt her with their demands. She simply shared her happiness and thanked him for reaching out. The baby came in late September after a long and difficult labor. Xavier paced the floor of their bedroom while the doctor and a midwife from town worked to help Sarah. It was evening when they finally heard the baby's cry, sharp and angry and alive. It is a boy, the midwife said, wrapping the baby in a blanket. A healthy boy. Xavier came to Sarah's side, taking her hand. She was exhausted and sweaty, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. The midwife placed the baby in her arms, and Sarah looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. What should we name him? Xavier asked. Sarah had thought about this for months, running through names and trying to find one that felt right. Now, looking at her son, she knew. James, she said. James Thomas Keller, after my father and my first husband, so he knows where he came from. Xavier nodded, his eyes wet. James Thomas Keller. It is perfect. The first few months with a baby were harder than either of them had expected. James was colicky and cried often, and Sarah was exhausted from nursing and lack of sleep, but there was also joy in it, watching their son grow and change. His eyes, which had been dark blue at birth, slowly turned gray like Xavier's. He had Sarah's nose and mouth, and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. Xavier was a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried and changing diapers without complaint. Sarah watched him sing to their son in the evenings, his deep voice rumbling through the house, and fell in love with him all over again. In November, they celebrated James's 2-month birthday and their first anniversary. Sarah made a special dinner, and they toasted to the year behind them and all the years ahead. Do you ever regret it? Xavier asked. Staying here instead of going back to Philadelphia? Never, Sarah said. Not for a single moment. This is where I belong, with you with our son on this ranch. This is my home. Mine too, Xavier said. He raised his glass. To home. They settled into a routine over the next few years. The ranch continued to grow, slowly but steadily. They bought more cattle and expanded their grazing land. Xavier built the new barn he had wanted, with Sarah helping where she could. James grew from a fussy baby into a curious toddler, following his parents around the ranch and getting into everything. In the spring of 1886, Sarah found out she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in November she gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Catherine. She had Xavier's light brown hair and Sarah's dark eyes, and from the moment she was born, she was calm and content, in a way James had never been. She is going to be the easy one, Xavier predicted, holding his daughter carefully. Good, Sarah said, laughing. We need at least one easy child. Life on the ranch was never simple, but it was good. There were hard years, when the rain did not come and they had to sell off cattle to make ends meet. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant challenges of living in a harsh environment. But there were also good years, when the cattle were fat and healthy and the profits were strong, when the children laughed and played in the yard and the house was full of noise and life. Sarah and Xavier worked side by side through all of it, partners in every sense of the word. They expanded the ranch to 80 head of cattle, then 100. They hired hands to help with the work and built a proper bunkhouse for them. They became respected members of the community, known for their hard work and fair dealing. In 1888, they had another son, Benjamin. In 1890, twin girls arrived, Lucy and Margaret. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely was now bursting with children and noise and activity. Sarah sometimes looked around at the chaos and felt overwhelmed, but also deeply grateful. This was what she had wanted without even knowing it: a family, a home, a life full of love and purpose. Xavier was an attentive father, teaching the children to ride and rope and care for the animals. Sarah made sure they learned to read and write, holding lessons at the kitchen table every morning before the ranch work began. She wrote letters to Edward in Philadelphia, keeping him updated on the growing family, and he wrote back with news of his own life and children. On their 10th anniversary, in January 1894, Sarah and Xavier took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor. They rode out to a spot on the ranch where the land rose up and you could see for miles in every direction. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you remember that night in Flagstaff?" Sarah asked, "when you told me you had feelings for me?" "Of course," Xavier said. "I was terrified you would send me away." "I almost did," Sarah admitted. "I was so scared. Scared of what people would say, scared of losing someone else I loved, scared of everything. But you told me you would give me all the time I needed, and that made all the difference." Xavier pulled her close. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I will always be here." "I know," Sarah said. She looked out at the land stretching before them, the ranch they had built together. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if I had listened to Thomas's family and gone back to Philadelphia?" "Sometimes," Xavier said, "but I try not to dwell on it. We are here now, and this is real. Everything else is just might have beens." Sarah nodded. He was right, of course. The past was done, and the future was uncertain. All they had was this moment, together, watching the sun set over their land. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for building this life with me." "I love you too," Xavier said, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They stood there as the stars came out, holding each other and watching the darkness settle over the land. Below them, the lights of the ranch house glowed warm and welcoming, full of the children they had made and the life they had chosen. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Sarah's father died in Philadelphia, and she made the long journey east with Xavier and the children to attend the funeral. It was strange being back in the city, surrounded by buildings and people and noise. Her family marveled at how much she had changed, how confident and capable she had become. She introduced them to Xavier and the children, and saw the surprise in their eyes that she had built such a full and happy life so far from everything they knew. When they returned to Arizona, Sarah felt relief. The city had been interesting to visit, but it was not home anymore. Home was the ranch, with its wide skies and endless horizons. In 1896, James turned 11 and started taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. He was good with horses, showing the same instinct Xavier had. Emma was 9 and already showing signs of being a skilled businesswoman, carefully counting the egg money and keeping track of expenses in a little notebook. Benjamin was 7 and adventurous, always wandering off to explore and coming back with lizards and interesting rocks. The twins, Lucy and Margaret, were 6 and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and playing elaborate games that only they understood. Sarah looked at her children and saw pieces of herself and Xavier in all of them, but also something entirely their own. They were Western children, born to the land and the life. They would never know the constraints and expectations that had once bound Sarah. They were free in a way she had never been at their age. "We did well," Xavier said one evening, watching the children play in the yard. "We did," Sarah agreed. "Better than I ever imagined." The ranch continued to thrive as the century turned. By 1900, they had expanded to 150 head of cattle and were one of the most successful operations in the area. They had weathered droughts and storms, market fluctuations and personal challenges, and come through stronger for it. Sarah was 40 years old now, her dark hair showing threads of silver. Xavier was 42, with lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they were healthy and strong, and still deeply in love. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, talking and watching the sunset, just as they had when they first fell in love. One day in the spring of 1901, Sarah received a letter from Edward in Philadelphia. His wife had died after a long illness, and he was struggling to manage on his own. He asked if perhaps he could come visit the ranch, see what Sarah had built, maybe find some peace in the wide open spaces she had written about so often. Sarah showed the letter to Xavier. "What do you think?" "I think family is important," Xavier said. "And he was kind to you when others were not. If you want him to visit, I have no objection." Edward arrived in June, a thin man in his 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. He looked around the ranch with wonder, taking in the house and the barns and the cattle grazing in the distance. "This is remarkable," he said to Sarah. "Thomas would have been so proud of what you have accomplished." "Thank you," Sarah said. "But this is not what Thomas built. This is what Xavier and I built together, after Thomas was gone. Thomas had dreams, but he never quite knew how to make them real." Edward nodded slowly. "I know. My brother was always a dreamer. But you, Sarah, you are a doer. You make things happen." He stayed for 3 weeks, helping around the ranch and getting to know the children. Sarah watched him slowly relax, the grief and stress melting away under the Arizona sun. On his last day, he pulled her aside. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me come, for sharing your home with me. I was wrong all those years ago to push you to leave. You were right to stay. This is where you belong." "I am glad you see that now," Sarah said. "You are always welcome here, Edward. Family should stick together, even when they disagree." After Edward left, Sarah felt a sense of closure. The past was truly behind her now. She had made her peace with Thomas's memory and his family. She had built a new life, a good life, and she had done it on her own terms. The children grew and eventually began to leave home, one by one. James went to work on a ranch further north, wanting to make his own way. Emma married a young man from Flagstaff and moved to town to help run his family's store. Benjamin surprised everyone by going to university in Tucson, studying to be a veterinarian. The twins both married brothers from a neighboring ranch and settled nearby. By 1910, Sarah and Xavier were in their late 50s, with grandchildren starting to arrive. The ranch was still theirs, still thriving, but the work was harder now, and they had hired more hands to help. They talked about retiring, maybe selling the ranch, and moving into town where things were easier. But every time they seriously considered it, one or the other would look out at the land and shake their head. This was home. This was where they belonged. They would stay here as long as they were able. One evening in the fall of 1911, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Sarah's hair was mostly silver now, and Xavier's face was deeply lined. But their hands were still clasped together, their bodies still leaning into each other with the ease of long familiarity. "Do you remember what I said to you in Flagstaff?" Xavier asked, "about giving you all the time you needed?" "I do," Sarah said. "It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. I have been thinking about that lately, about time and how we spend it. We have had 28 years together, Sarah. 28 years of marriage and partnership and love. And if I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single moment." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Neither would I. You saved me, Xavier. Not from anything dramatic or dangerous, but from a life of doing what other people expected. You gave me the freedom to choose my own path." "We saved each other," Xavier said. "I was drifting before I met you, never settling anywhere. You gave me a reason to stay, a place to belong. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and orange. Below them, the ranch spread out, solid and real. Their legacy, built from stubbornness and love, and hard work. I am glad I waited for you, Sarah said softly. I am glad you gave me the time to figure out what I wanted, because what I wanted was this. All of this. You, the ranch, our children, this life. It was worth waiting for. It was, Xavier agreed. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. And I would wait 1,000 years if it meant having this with you. They remained there as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The night settled around them, gentle and familiar, full of promise and memory and love that had grown deeper with every passing year. Below them, the ranch lights glowed warm in the darkness. Inside, the house held the memories of decades together. The kitchen, where they had shared their first coffee and negotiated their first agreement. The bedroom where their children had been born. The table where they had planned and dreamed and built their life together piece by piece. Sarah thought about the woman she had been at 23, standing outside that bank in Ash Fork, refusing to give up even though she had no idea what to do next. She thought about Xavier riding up to her on that dusty street, offering help when she desperately needed it. She thought about all the moments in between, the struggles and triumphs, the fears and joys, the ordinary days that had added up to an extraordinary life. Thank you, she said again, though she had said it countless times before. For everything. Thank you, Xavier replied, understanding without needing explanation what she meant. For choosing me, for choosing this life, for choosing us. And there, on the porch of the ranch they had built together, Sarah Victoria Keller and Xavier Keller sat hand in hand, watching the stars wheel overhead and feeling the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love that had endured through all the years and all the challenges, and had only grown stronger for it. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The sounds of home, familiar and beloved. Their grandchildren would visit tomorrow, bringing noise and laughter and the continuation of everything they had built. But tonight was just for them, for remembering and being grateful and knowing that they had found something precious and rare. They had found each other when both of them needed it most. They had built a life together based on patience and respect and deep, abiding love. And they had proven that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, that taking all the time you need is not weakness, but wisdom, that love given freely and without pressure is the kind of love that lasts forever. As the moon rose over the Arizona landscape, casting silver light across the ranch lands, Sarah leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder and closed her eyes. She was home. She was loved. She had chosen her own path, and it had led her here to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful life. And it was more than enough. It was everything.